Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Matty B. And it finally happened. Tom Brady is retiring from the NFL. The greatest player of all time. Undisputed. I saw someone that said, hey, too bad he didn't win one more Super Bowl to really prove he was the greatest. I'm like, one more Super Bowl? What are you talking about? And then people assume that Patrick Mahomes is going to catch him. Or I've seen some people say Herbert. You have to win one, Herbert, or even like do anything. You know, you can't just pass and break some records and then become Tom Brady. I think honestly, the one guy that has the swagger to do it would be Joe Burrow. He's already been injured though. I know Tom Brady fought injuries, and he doesn't even have a Super Bowl win. He's the same age I think as Brady was when he won his first one. So he's already an older player because he was at Ohio State and then transferred, which I don't think a lot of people realize that. They probably think he's like super young. But maybe. But I don't think I guess he might have a supporting cast with the Bengals. It depends on how, like the Tom Brady thing worked out perfect because he got the supporting cast, got a couple more. He lost a couple. That's how dominant he was. You have to get to the game. Mahomes got there twice, lost one, won one. But you actually have to win it to get the title of the greatest of all time. Otherwise, Jim Kelly would be up there, right? But what are your thoughts on the man and his career?
I mean, he definitely produced over time. So I was kind of surprised he didn't stick around for one more, saying that he wanted to play to 45. But watching the beating that he took in the NFC Championship game, I'm not surprised that he decided to hang it up because I don't know that they were going to be able to get the additional protection to keep him upright for another year.
I think most of the contract stuff, it was almost like a 2-year deal. I think a third year would have been kind of pushing it with the injuries that they had this year. I just think it was kind of bad luck. I mean, if those guys didn't get injured on the offense, most likely they're probably playing for another Super Bowl. Like, let's be honest.
Well, I think missing Godwin and then having AB meltdown.
Yeah, because that wasn't really an injury.
You know, you take those two threats away, that really changes the dynamic of that game.
So you lose those guys, and then you're really supposed to battle and come in. And he almost came back. I mean, they did come back against the Rams. When he left the field, it was tied. He never got back on the field. So
the crazy thing is that you're watching the game unfold, and it's like even when they're down multiple scores, that you're like, I've seen this play out before. Like this game is far from over, and then it's like all of a sudden you start to just see they drive down and score one. Oh, it's a 2-score game. They score again. Oh, we're down to 1 score. The other team fumbles. Like, they just crack under pressure.
Well, that's what I told you. If they would have just kept kicking field goals instead of going for it on 4th down, they would have won. Like, then the Rams would have been, like, trying to come back because they were clearly cracking. But it's the NFL, and you're obviously thinking, like, hey, this Rams team is loaded. They're not going to choke. So we might as well just go for it and try to get back into the game when, in hindsight, he's looking back, he's probably like, man, if we would have just kicked a couple field goals, we at least would have got to overtime. Like, let's say we missed one of the 2 field goals. I think they went for it twice down there and missed both times. I think just getting points, that's why I'm a big fan of taking points. I think it was already the 4th quarter, though, so I understand where you're like, hey, this is a long shot for us to even come back. Let's just go for it. But they didn't give up. And it took those fumbles, right? Because I think after the 1 4th down was when Akers fumbled. So it's like, all right, now you're back in. But I could have my timing wrong there. But overall, people are talking about him going into the Hall of Fame as either a Patriot or a Buccaneer. I would think you would go in as a Patriot. But as we talked about last week or the week before, whenever that was, Hall of Fames don't mean anything. So who cares? Like, is the Football Hall of Fame better than the baseball one? Like, no, they're probably going to do the same bullshit sometime where they like don't vote players in. And they'll probably be like, well, remember when they had the Flakegate and that other thing, the Spygate or whatever, which is more of Belichick and his thing. So, I mean, even Sean Payton with Bountygate. Like, there are a couple other ones, and we'll see what happens. But I say greatest of all time. He easily could have went to any team and I think won one more Super Bowl. Not now, I'm saying the year before when he went to the Bucs. So I'm surprised that any team didn't look at that and be like, you know what? I want a piece of that. Because even when Joe Montana went to the Chiefs, they didn't get it done. But he turned the Chiefs around and they were almost there, right? What did they lose? Like they were in the playoffs pretty far, I think. Although they weren't that many games in. But yeah. I mean, that was around the time where it's like, all right, are you going to be able to get in? Now I got to prove my value. Tom Brady really didn't get pushed out like Joe Montana did. So it was like he's just going and proving that he can win. And I think that's a big key for him.
Well, that was always one of the things that Bill Walsh always looked at. Like when he moved Joe Montana out, he was always trying to cycle the roster to try to move guys out when they were were able to play for like another 3 to 5 years, so that he was constantly looking for that next replacement player. And to be able to have like using that comparable situation where he goes from Montana to Young, and then like with Green Bay going from Favre to Rodgers, like you want that stability in the quarterback position. And I think with Belichick, he had some of that stability where he had Castle and he had Garoppolo, and it just seemed like there was kind of some rifts there where he got away from it, and he still ended up landing Mac Jones. So, I mean, it's like he has that continuity.
Well, we'll see, because Mac Jones hasn't really been slinging the ball. They've been playing back to the old Tom Brady style, if you remember, when people didn't think Tom Brady was that good, and everyone was like praising all kind of the whatever on Belichick instead, saying that he was the mastermind and not Tom Brady, even though Tom Brady's career, if you remember, he was making last-minute drives his entire career. And I think that's what separates him from the other guys. I mean, being honest, like looking at Mahomes at the game on Sunday, I had no confidence that Mahomes was going to move the ball and score a touchdown. Tony Romo, on the other hand, he was like in love with them. He was saying that the Bengals should just let them score because they're going to anyway. And then what an idiot. He looked awful. And so he took that sack and fumbled the ball, and I was like, oh my God, could you imagine Tom Brady doing that? I know Tom Brady fumbled that one Super Bowl away with like the Eagles or whatever, but that was like them trying to come back and him holding on to the ball. It wasn't on the goal line. Like that was like a Pete Carroll like passing the ball like when Russell Wilson threw that interception, and everyone's like, what an awful play call. It's like, why is he passing that pass? Like, did he not see the guy? When no one ever blames Russell Wilson, right?
Right.
But like, could you imagine Tom Brady just throwing it to their team at the goal line? I mean, even Kurt Warner did it that one time against the Steelers.
When I do think like early in Brady's career, they had the defense that could really support him, so that he didn't have to be the one to carry him. And you saw over the course of the years that like that offense evolved to where he was starting to take advantage and being more actively involved in the play calling. And you saw it's kind of similar to the way Pittsburgh evolved with Roethlisberger, that I think is as he progressed into the league. I mean, he got to a point where there's only so many variations of stuff you're going to see. So like he had already seen probably everything that a defense could throw at him over the course of his 20 years.
Yeah, that's what I was looking now to see if they picked an MVP winner. Because like, didn't Tom Brady have all the records this year? And he's like, how old? Like 44, 43? I don't even know how old he is. I think
44. Because he needed that other year to be.
So yeah, he would have been 45. He'd have been Julio Franco age. He's like just out there. And they're like, oh my gosh, that guy's still playing? But it's the greatest of all time. So could you imagine? But he's still breaking records. He should have been the MVP. I don't think they announced it. I looked it up. I didn't see it. And maybe they will name him that. But I just look at it and say, you look at the other quarterbacks around the league, you have to have dedication to stay healthy and to have that type of focus to just keep your body in shape. Because whoever was calling the game, was it Aikman? He was talking about the throws from Matt Stafford, and he's like, he must be injured or something because he's underthrowing all these like 80-yard bombs. I'm like, he's old. What are you talking about? He must be injured. He's old. He can't throw that far. Like, look around the league. Like, a lot of those guys, once they get to a certain age, you're like, this is kind of his last rodeo. He might be able to kind of dink and dunk around, but you also have to not make mistakes. I mean, we've seen Tom Brady make mistakes, and it's bad, and they get killed. And then everyone's kind of like, yeah, maybe he's not going to do it. But when you get to the playoffs, you got to be able to turn it on. And he's a player that could do that. You look at some of these other players, it's like they can't, I don't know if they can consistently do it enough to win 7 Super Bowls or however many he had. Wasn't it 7?
Yeah.
So I'll be shocked. I know, like, even in my lifetime, if we had another player, the guys that are playing right now, if any of them won 5 or more Super Bowls, I would be incredibly shocked. What do you think?
I don't think that it's plausible anymore because of the way that the salary cap and some of those contracts are, where you're not going to keep a lot of those players around long term. That I think it could happen. I mean, unless the only way that it could potentially happen is for someone like a Mahomes, where he's able to attract veteran players that are willing to sign league minimum and just try to compete and go that way with it. And
we don't know if he's able to do that. I mean, it only takes a year or another hot quarterback to come in and try to take some of that swagger. If Joe Burrow wins the Super Bowl this year and players see that he has swagger, he's supporting his team, you can kind of just see the energy from him, where that team's like confident. Even the kicker was out there saying like, hey, we're going to the championship game before kicking the game or whatever, because they talked about that the entire game this weekend. So it's like, all right, well, if the team is that confident, the veterans are going to want to play there because they'll see it as their last hurrah and say, hey, this is my best chance of winning a Super Bowl. I'll play with this guy. As much like Tom Brady is able to get guys out of retirement to say, you know what? I'll battle with this dude because there's a good chance I'm going to get one more Super Bowl. I'm going to get my money's worth, whatever. But as a quarterback, Mahomes is already commanding like league record salary. Tom Brady never did that. And that's another big key, like you had brought up about the roster. If Tom Brady was making like the record contract, he wouldn't have had that many Super Bowls because at some point you're going to have to make cuts elsewhere. I think you need a guy that's more focused on winning. And I mean, they talked about his wife, like, oh, well, she makes more than him, so he doesn't have to do that. And they're like, all right, well, maybe he's more focused on winning then. I don't know. Maybe you need a guy that isn't the breadwinner, that has to prove himself in the home and on the field.
But I think it's to his credit that he has his developed system and was able to maintain like the nutrition and the
nutrition's 100%
and stuff. Like
everyone struggles with that.
I mean, there's so many players that they come into camp out of shape, and like I mean, even who was that? Eddie Lacy had to be on like a financial incentive to try to lose weight to be productive. Like, you know, he was able to have a system that worked for him, and you know, I think that led to a lot of his success too, because he was able to maintain his health for a long duration of his career.
And that's where I think you see a lot of quarterbacks, they kind of get to the point where you know they're probably not working out, but they probably don't have the energy to do both working out and, you know, playing the game at a high level. So they're like, coach, I can do one or the other. I can't be doing both at this point. But I don't know. Great player. Sad to see him go. I always love cheering for him. I know a lot of people hated him for whatever reason, but at this point, I mean, there's really nothing negative. Even the stuff people were like, hey, kisses his son on the mouth. Like weird stuff. It's like, all right, well, if you want to fixate on something weird like that, go for it, man. That's on you. I'm looking at the football player, and I'll say that he made the league more exciting. He's a funny guy. Even if you listen to some of his interviews, he's always cracking jokes. So I wonder what he'll get into next. Maybe he'll do nothing. I don't think he'll be on TV. I have a feeling he's not going to do that. But I wonder if he'll end up coaching or something. We'll find out. He said he hates the cold weather, though. So maybe he'll be at Florida State, Matt. He'll probably be in the NFL, if anything. But I think a lot of like long-term quarterbacks that are more journeymen try to take that route because they're used to coaching on the sideline. Where if you're the guy playing and you're like, I think he'd just get frustrated. Like, why are you making the wrong read there? Like every time, you know? I think that would be the worst. So maybe he won't do that. He has his diet thing though. Maybe he'll be like a personal trainer. He'll be like the Gazelle guy that does that. Those infomercials be like, hey, I'm Tom Brady. Or even Marino did those like weight slim commercials or whatever. Slim Fast. Was it Slim Fast? I can't even remember.
Nutrisystem.
That's it. I knew you would know. They're more marketed in the Western Pennsylvania region. Anything else you got on Tom Brady?
No.
I did have, so my next segue into that, there's been an interesting story that's been coming out. I looked through the details, and I'll be honest, I really didn't care. And I tried to read a recap from like the comments, and it was just people arguing what they thought that the article meant. So apparently, Dolphins owner Stephen Ross tried to get a meeting with Flores and Tom Brady whenever Tom Brady was a free agent or sometime around that. The dates didn't really make sense, so people didn't know if it was tampering or not. I'm just going to say for the sake of the show that it wasn't. Maybe it was like a little bit before the time. I don't know. But Flores tries to go out for a meeting with the owner. The owner's like, hey.
Because Flores had worked in New England.
Yeah.
So he would have had that relationship with Tom Brady.
Yeah, and so you're with your owner, the guy that pays you, and like your boss, and then he tells you, hey, we're going to meet with a talented quarterback. It turns out to be Tom Brady, and so he ends up leaving? Can you imagine, Matt? I mean, maybe he's worried about getting in trouble, but like the owner's already there. So they're not going to use the coach as a scapegoat. Could you imagine? Like if the TV, because if he would have been fired for like tampering or whatever, they would have easily just been like, ESPN would have said, well, why were you there? And you're like, oh yeah, the owner, set this up, right?
But that almost seemed like that was partly why it happened, because there was speculation that the owner was trying to pay him $100,000 a game to lose.
Well, I think that was this year.
Yeah.
Or last year. It was after the Tom Brady thing. So because that's where there were a couple allegations. So the Tom Brady thing was kind of like the first setup. He wanted him to kind of talk with Tom Brady to see if they could, because Tom Brady was taking recruiting trips around that time. You remember?
Yeah.
And so like he made that comment, like they went with that guy, which everyone thought was the 49ers because he had said he's leaning there. I still think it was the 49ers. I don't think it would have been the Dolphins, because if the coach doesn't meet with you, he's not going to go there. He said right off the bat he wanted someone where he could talk to and be comfortable. If he shows up at the meeting and then the coach doesn't show up, that's all kind of red flags for me, Like, all right, well, then I can't come here. I only have 2 years left. Like, I'm definitely not working for a guy that's just going to walk out or whatever. That's crazy. But the second part of that, like you said, the Dolphins had started to win at the end of the year, and he had said that the owner told him that he would pay him extra to lose the games to try to get higher draft picks, which, is that against league rules, Matt? As an owner, I haven't seen that document. I don't know.
Usually frowned upon for tanking.
Well, tanking, yeah. But, I mean, I don't know if it's 100% against the rules. In the NFL, it's a little bit different, though. Maybe. It's not like basketball where they're like really, really trying to stop it because teams are just so bad, no one wants to watch them. In the NFL, like, you're still there. I mean, look at the Lions. Could you imagine the Bengals get Joe Burrow? The Lions have been struggling with like that number one pick for how many years? And they've got nothing. I know that was like the first win or like back-to-back wins ever for the Bengals. And they hadn't won a playoff game since like the 80s. I don't know if the Lions have won one since then, but you got to imagine that they got pretty lucky. So I don't know what to think about it. I know he's trying to sue the league or whatever he's doing, but at this point it's kind of like, I don't know if it's sour grapes, because why wait to bring it up? Like if the relationship was that bad, why not take other interviews? He was highly sought after last year, wasn't he? It just seems like he tanked his career. Because I think every team kind of wanted him. And there are rumors of him taking other jobs. Instead, he never did. Ends up getting fired. And now he's like, well now I'm going to go scorched earth. So who's going to hire him now? I just don't get it.
Well, I was curious, and I was thinking about this before all this news dropped. But I just kept thinking of all the coaches that had gotten fired. I didn't think there was a lot of talent in Miami to begin with. Like they had Tua, but then they were also trying to get Deshaun Watson. They were in the running for Tom Brady. It seemed like they were still searching for an identity and trying to get the pieces in place to have a successful team. And it was like they were winning games with like pieced together team. And I thought of all the firings, like that was an unjustified, irrational firing. But if the owner's like, hey, we want you to lose the rest of your games, and he's not doing it, like it makes sense why they would have fired him at the end of the year.
And it seems like the owner's trying to bring in the greatest quarterback of all time, and you're sabotaging it. So I feel like it's not the first strike. You know, it's like, hey, why are you winning these games? Like, what are you doing? Is it for the bonus? I'll give you the bonus money even if we lose. Because how do you know he just didn't say that, you know? I don't know what the contract was set up was, but I will say I've seen this a lot where people like Tom Brady would never went to the Dolphins. He instead went to a loaded Bucs team. The Bucs were not loaded. They hadn't won a playoff game for like 20 years. What you saw was like what we talked about. Tom Brady signs up, and then a bunch of vets are like, hey, you know what? I'll go play with this guy. I'll come out of retirement for Tom Brady. So like,
and I'm sure the extra lure of being in Florida, it wasn't like he was trying to draw people to cold Massachusetts.
Yeah, so I honestly don't think there would have been a difference. I think he would have went to Miami, and they probably still would have won a Super Bowl. He would have had a lot of the same supporting cast. Antonio Brown was around. They have, Gronk would have been there. I know, like, some of the Buccaneers, like, receivers like Mike Evans and them, they were there already. But the Dolphins have some decent receivers. So, like, I think they would have had a similar team set up. Remember, Fournette they signed. Still could have had him with the Dolphins.
Yep.
So, like, the defense was the one thing where it was kind of like, well, the defense started playing a lot better, but Tom Brady was putting them in better spots. And so you're drafting a bunch of defensive guys and having a young defense that's hungry. And all you need is a guy that's just confident that turns your defense around. I mean, look at what the Bengals did. They were crap a few years ago. Joe Burrow starts playing with confidence, and what? Now their defense is great? It just didn't become great. It's not like the Broncos where they've had a great defense, or like the 49ers where for years they had a great defense, and the offense was just awful. And you're like, you know what? All they need is one quarterback. One guy to come in and they could win it. And that's why I think you saw both the Broncos and the 49ers try to get Peyton Manning back then. And what happened? Peyton Manning went to the Broncos, so they got lucky in a Super Bowl. I said this, I was arguing with someone the other day, and I was like, the Broncos won because they got Manning. That was the only difference in like those two team setups. So if you're looking at like what changed now, the 49ers are kind of in the similar spot. They obviously didn't care for Garoppolo. They've been trying to get rid of him. And they're close to having a Super Bowl defense again. And they're like, you know what? All we need to do is get rid of this guy. I don't know why they didn't go for Tom Brady or whatever. I think they wanted more pieces is what it was. They couldn't move Garoppolo and get the draft picks they wanted. And Tom Brady was there, and they're like, well, we can't move our other guy. The Dolphins had no one. They had Ryan Fitzpatrick at that time. So for Tom Brady to be like, the Dolphins are sticking with them, it just doesn't make sense to me. I still think Brady wanted the 49ers. And I guess we'll never know unless he comes out and says who it was. But anything else you have on that?
Well, the cherry on top of it is now texts are being released and a lawsuit's being filed. That they're looking that apparently Belichick messaged Flores thinking that it was Brian Daboll and like congratulated him on the job if that's who he wanted, and then realized, oh, I sent it to the wrong person. and so now Flores has the potential ammunition to go after the league, and it's a really bold move because potentially, if he doesn't win his case, he could end up getting blacklisted out of the league for trying to file a lawsuit against the NFL.
Matt, he's done anyway. Like I said, no owner's going to hire this guy that wasn't listening to the owner, admits that he didn't work well with the owner, and everyone's going to look and say, like, you had Tom Brady, but you didn't even show up? Like, you decided to leave because they, surprised you with them? Like, hey, here's a guy you know, let's hang out. It'd be like, oh, you know what? Nah, I wasn't ready for this. I'm out of here. Like,
McDaniels got fired in Denver,
and now you got hired by the Raiders. Awful hire.
Went back to New England, resurfaced on the other side, and now everything's good. It's like the NFL. The New England is the Alabama of the NFL, where if you want to get recycled into the league, just go back to New England.
I don't think McDaniels had like a controversy like this though, right? He just sucked. I mean,
yeah.
He even said in his interview, like, hey, I sucked last time. Now I'm going to be good.
It's like, I didn't know how to work with people. Like, that's kind of an important skill to have on the job.
Yeah, as you interview the first time, how did they even hire you? Get past that? They're like, so what do you think about working and putting together your own staff? He's like, hate it. Absolutely hate it. Worst part of the job. And they're like, you know what, though? I think that could work here in Denver. Wherever he was. Well, speaking with that, so we're talking about like coaching things and trying to get like the formality of like, hey, we're going to hire this guy. The rumor right now is that Harbaugh is going to be taking the job with the Vikings, which to me, I think I said it last week, maybe the week before. I don't think the last couple of years he's been kind of playing with the NFL. Remember, he took the big pay cut at Michigan. I don't think he actually had an NFL offer. And so if you look at his stats, I'm kind of surprised that he would get one now. I know they finally beat Ohio State, but in terms of big games, I've been trying to tell people this that always ask me, they're like, hey, how do you feel about Harbaugh leaving? It's like, okay, I'm surprised they're taking him. And everyone's like, well, why? I'm like, he's like, what, 1-5 in bowl games? 1-5 against Ohio State? He's whatever his record against ranked teams was like abysmal. His bowl record, or no, I said his bowl record. His playoff record was, of course, 0-1 this year. Playoff record got killed by Georgia. Then Michigan State, a team with lesser talent, he went 3-4, losing a bunch of games they were favored heavily by. And it's like, all right, you can't win rivalry games when you have a talent advantage that is pretty large that you should win 80% of the time. And I'm not slamming Michigan State. That's just how it is. Look at how many times Ohio State beats them. So you're telling me that Harbaugh in the NFL, where everyone's kind of having the same talent, he's going to the Vikings where maybe he has to coach against Aaron Rodgers twice a year? Is he really going to beat him? No. I'd be shocked if he did. If he would have went to the Raiders, I think that would have even been more absurd to expect him to come in and beat Patrick Mahomes twice, you know?
Yeah.
Like, oh, really? Because like that's the kind of level of what he failed at Michigan. And a lot of people were like, well, he didn't have his players. In the NFL, is that going to be the excuse? Like at some point, you have to show up in some of the big games. If you go back and look through the data, there's only a handful out of 6 or 7 years he's been there now of big games that he showed up for. A couple against Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State this year. You could say Iowa won the Big Ten championship, although he had much more talent. So now you're finally starting to see it. But in the NFL, I mean, I know you're going to lose a bunch of games throughout the year, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a cushion. But when the playoffs come around, I don't think he has the edge anymore that he had with the 49ers when he first started, where they were coming into the playoffs. I honestly think, I don't know if it was the Super Bowl against his brother that broke him, because if you remember, they came out really flat in that game.
Yeah.
Really played really conservative and scared, and then by the time they turned it on, it was too late. I think you saw a lot of that at Michigan in big games. Come out flat, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? You make your second half adjustments, and it's like, man, if only they would have had a game plan at the beginning that was like at the end, they could have won, right? So I don't know. What do you think of it? What do you think of it if he goes to the Vikings right now?
Well, I think the Vikings were one of the teams that we talked about, other than the Raiders, that made sense for him to go to, because he values a strong run game, and he would have Dalvin Cook there. He would have Kirk Cousins. He would have like the basis of that strong running form, like the strong tight ends and fullbacks type offense that he prefers. So I mean, I think it would be a good fit for him, that he wouldn't have to spend as much time flipping the roster. So I do think it would be helpful.
I mean, I just don't see what he would bring to Minnesota other than what they've had before. Where they've been close, can't win the big game, can't advance in the playoffs, right? Even if they're favored. Yeah. So, like, you're bringing him in. Kirk Cousins is already there. I'm like wondering, is he going to crush Kirk Cousins?
But I mean, maybe what you do is you're because you're going to be so much heavier with your run game that you don't carry as much with your passing game. So with fewer concepts, he has more time that he can get the reps and potentially be more successful, as opposed to if they were spending more time. And I haven't watched as much Minnesota this year because I just didn't have anyone from Minnesota on my fantasy team. But in years where I did watch it, like, it looked like they were doing a lot of the more complicated concepts, so that it was going to be more on the quarterback. Well,
they had Thielen, and he was awesome, and then he got hurt, remember? So I watched a good bit of him. With like Jefferson, though, like Michigan had those type of players with Harbaugh. Like they had Peoples-Jones. Look at how he has a big playability with the Browns. So think of how much he would have been able to use that in college. Barely used them. Like a lot of the receivers that Michigan's been put into the NFL that have been playing fairly well, it's almost like, oh, wow. Like, I wonder if Harbaugh would have just like unleashed some passing, every once in a while, how good these guys really could have been. And it really could have helped the recruiting. So as a fan, I don't see how it could be worse, Like if you're telling me in 7 years Michigan makes the playoffs once, I'm like, all right, well that's probably good. That's at least what you would expect from one of the big programs, I think, right? Like I think at Florida State, you would expect them to make the playoffs once or twice a decade, don't you think? At the minimum,
I would like to see that.
So I mean, if another coach comes in, if you're telling me, well, we're going to hire another coach. And it's like, okay, well, what's the downside? Well, they might lose to Ohio State. It's like, all right, well, Harbaugh's already doing that. Well, they might not win the Big Ten. Okay, well, he wasn't doing that either. It's like, what's the negative here, You're not going to beat up on Rutgers? You're not going to beat them 78-0? Because I think a regular coach can kind of do that too.
Well, I think the negative of him leaving is, I think he's the best of the evils, because right now I don't see a college coach that goes to Michigan and brings that wow factor. Like I think it would end up having to be, with it being this close to National Signing Day, without losing a bunch of recruits, I think it would have to just be an internal promotion and bring Gaddis up.
Well, and that's where another thing you're looking at it too. It's like, well, why did he wait so long? Is he really just bitter about the pay cut last year? And he's just looking to get out? Because the rumor was that he asked the Raiders for almost like a John Gruden contract. I don't know if you saw that. So
yeah.
The rumors were he wanted like $10 million and full control. And they were like, look, we just got in trouble with that. We're not going to do it again. And so then they said he cut ties. The Raiders put out stuff that they didn't even talk to him or interview him as their like defense. So you don't know who to believe at that point. Probably the Raiders, right? It was like, why would you just leverage some guy? And it's like, hey, well, what did you do this year? He's like, yeah, I beat Ohio State. They're like, one time. And they're like, how did you do in the playoffs? Oh, we got killed. It's like, all right. So if you brought us to the playoffs, would we be getting killed? Is that what you're telling me? Like you weren't prepared? Well, they had more talent than us. It's like, okay, yeah, but you didn't have anything to slow them down. Because if they would have slowed down the offense at all, they would have had a better shot to win the game. And like switch quarterbacks or whatever you need to do. But that's what I'm looking at. Long term in the NFL, right now he has like the 4th or 5th highest winning percentage of all time in the NFL. I don't know if people know that. Like Harbaugh was an awesome coach for a few years. That's why it's crazy that the Niners pushed him out. And that's why all the NFL teams wanted to hire him. But that was how many years ago now? I think over time they've seen his end game coaching mistakes against teams like Michigan State that you're supposed to win. And an NFL owner is going to look at that and say, okay, well, how many excuses can I give him before I bring him onto my team to have that same thing? I mean, even look at his brother. How many overtime games or end of game situations are they going to choke away going for 2? Like, is that going to be something that he's going to bring to the table too? So if I was a fan of the Vikings, I'd be kind of like, all right, well, we're getting Harbaugh. At this point, is it anything better? Now, if it was the Jets or the Browns and you're getting Harbaugh, then I would say, all right, awesome. Because I think he would at least get you to that minimum, like 500 level, almost like Tomlin, right? But you're looking at different franchises and what to expect. I just don't think he's going to take a team that has been close the past decade, and he's not going to be the guy that puts them over the edge, I don't think. Without them landing like a big-time quarterback or something that can kind of offset him. But I honestly think that he doesn't have the personality that a big-time quarterback wants to sign with. Right? I think he's been kind of a negative to some of Michigan's recruiting.
Yeah,
we don't know. I mean, you can't say that he's recruited head and shoulders better than Brady Hoke did. And I mean, there's been a lot of negative recruiting stuff that's come out directed directly at him. So maybe it will get better for Michigan. I wouldn't be shocked if they hired some random coach. Because like even Matt Rule's supposed to be really interested. I don't know if you saw that. So down here, I was talking to a couple people that are Panthers fans, and apparently they hate him. There's a rumor that he told the team that he could have any college coaching job he wanted. Like, you're coaching the NFL, why would you even say that? And like, what would prompt you to bring that up? Right? So like there's rumors that he's already kind of reached out and told Michigan that he would be interested in the job. But like if Harbaugh goes to the NFL, I'd be interested in it coming, which would be kind of a shock. Cause like you said, Harbaugh waited so long now that the team is kind of screwed.
And that would be one of the only moves that I think would truly be to Michigan's benefit.
Bill O'Brien, Matt. Actually, to be honest, though, I'm throwing out these names as like jokes. But Luke Fickell would be the guy. I've seen a lot of things where
there's no way.
Well, we'll say so here. Luke Fickell or Matt Campbell, they would both, I think, would take it. People were going to say, "Oh, he's an Ohio State guy." Ohio State skipped him as head coach twice. What's he waiting for? They're not going to take him. If he really wanted to prove to Ohio State that he could take the job, apparently he was really looking at Notre Dame this year too. Notre Dame also skipped him. So at some point, if you're a big time program like Michigan, you have to look at him and say, look, he took Cincinnati to the playoffs. We're losing our coach late. If we're going to take a flyer on someone, why not take a guy that might come in and be pissed off at our biggest rival, right? Because Schembechler came from Ohio State. So, like, you're going to bring him in, and he's going to be pissed because they just decided to, like, hey, we're not even going to interview anyone. We're just going to name Ryan Day coach. And he's like, yeah, but I wanted the job. I was interim there, and I proved myself at Cincinnati. And they're like, we're never going to hire you back. So, like, where else would Fickell go? Like, what other big-time job is he waiting for, Matt? Right?
Well, and maybe that's just him being frustrated that the Carolina Panthers fans are expecting him to be...
Wait, are you talking about Roll?
Yeah.
Because I was talking about Luke Fickell. He's at Cincinnati, the Bearcats coach?
Yeah, but I thought you were saying, like, with connecting Roll to to Michigan with him saying about.
Oh no, Rule actually said that he wanted to coach at Michigan. Like, let me see if I can find it. Like, that was the leak. Was that if Harbaugh goes, Rule is interested in going there?
Because, like, that's why you make those comments. Like, I could have any college job.
So this is from the Panthers Wire, which is USA Today. So CBS Jason LaCanfra said that Rule would be interested in the University of Michigan job if Jim Harbaugh goes back to the NFL. The league sources even say that Rule would probably be at the top of their list. And he was even considering several college options this past fall after being on the hot seat with David Tepper. So he was keeping a close eye on Penn State, which is where he was from, right? So I think that's another situation where he's looking at, hey, I can get back to Penn State if Franklin jumps. I'm interested in going back to Penn State. He's telling all the NFL guys. They don't hire him. Similar to like Luke Fickell, he's at Cincinnati. He wanted the Ohio State job. They give it to Ryan Day. A bunch of Ohio State fans say, oh, well, Luke Fickell will never coach at Michigan because he hates them too much. But like I said, where else is his career supposed to go? Like, if you're a Buckeyes fan, you have to realize, like, this is real life. You can't just be like holding on to your rival hatred for so long. At some point, you got to be like, hey, I'm already, let's look up how old Luke Fickell is. Because I think he's the most realistic behind Matt Campbell. And maybe Michigan doesn't take him. But like Luke Fickell's 48, so he's like almost 50. He hasn't had a Division I job since the interim head coach of Ohio State the year they lost to Michigan in 11 before they hired Urban Meyer. So he tried to get the job then. They hired Urban Meyer. Understandable, right? So then he puts himself in a position building up Cincinnati to where he's like, hey, I'm right here. And they're like, no, we're going with Ryan Day. Like, Fickell, you're done. You like at that point, Ohio State's going to hire him when he's like, what, 55, 60? Like, if Ryan Day was going to leave for the NFL, it would have been this year, right? Did the Bears hire anyone? That was the rumor, him to the Bears. Which would be insane if Harbaugh went to the Vikings and then he went to the Bears. Could you imagine that?
Well, the crazy flip would be Harbaugh goes to the Vikings, Rule goes to Michigan, and then Fickell jumps.
What, to the Panthers? Where do you have Fickell going? If Ryan
Day goes to the Panthers, which opens up Ohio State.
And then Fickell slides right in.
And completes the circle of stink.
Well, because those are the two that everyone's saying, that you have Luke Fickell, and if Matt Rule is seriously interested in leaving the NFL, he's obviously pissed off. He's had a poor experience there. He wants to get back at the college game and win right away. He has the NFL pedigree. I don't think you'd really see a drop-off with that, right? Plus, he had Joe Brady, too. Could you imagine? And they made him fire him. Could you imagine if he went to Michigan and was like, I'm hiring Joe Brady back? Like an awesome college offensive coordinator? Like, what would people say? Like, they're not going to be like, yeah, that's a negative, you know?
But would Michigan accept him?
Why wouldn't they?
I don't know. It was bad enough that the Carolina Panthers had him fired.
Yeah, but that was just because of his offense, and I think they used him as a scapegoat. I think that was more of the NFL. He wasn't an NFL guy, really. And they're like, we're going to get rid of these guys, kind of just like Urban Meyer. Because, like, at that point, so you have them, you have Fickell, you have Rule. I would say maybe Matt Campbell at Iowa State, because you're in the same situation where he's lost a lot of luster, though, how Iowa State choked this year. So, like, do you get him just because it's late in the cycle? I mean, he has been successful. Do you go with a guy like PJ Fleck that's always interested in Michigan? Like, he's always interested enough that they're rumored to him going with him. It's like, all right. I don't think he really has any ties to Michigan. So I don't know. Or do you just go with Gaddis, like you said? Because that's one where he's going to be the head coach. I think it's taken him quite a few years to learn on the job to be offensive coordinator, though, that I don't think going right to him would be the best long-term move. Because look at Michigan State. They've misfired on how many coaches before they got lucky with Mel Tucker? I think you just need a coach that's going to come in with the attitude that says, like, you know what? I'm going to prove myself. And I think you have a couple with Luke Fickell needs to prove himself because he just got killed by Cincinnati. or in the playoffs by Alabama at Cincinnati, does he say like, you know what? Ohio State didn't want me. I can prove that I'm better than Jim Harbaugh just by actually, showing up in the playoffs when I have better players, And then boom, shows up. You have JJ McCarthy unless he transfers. So like the cupboard's not bare. Harbaugh has a pretty good Michigan team coming back next year, which is kind of like the most shocking thing is, and I think that's another big thing. Like, do you lose those guys if Harbaugh jumps and you don't get a big name hire? Like if you promote Gaddis, do they stay? Because you don't want to hire a coach just to keep the recruits, right? That never works out.
Yeah, it's a tough sell.
So we'll see what happens. That's going to be one of the big ones. I think those are the biggest rumors that I've heard. I have heard, so Stephen Ross, we talked about the Dolphins earlier. He has come out and said that he would not hire Harbaugh away from Michigan. I've heard some rumblings that if Harbaugh's serious about going to the Vikings, he might have an offer on the table to hire him instead. So wouldn't it be funny if he just ended up with the Dolphins randomly? It's like they have their own controversy, and then Harbaugh's like, you know what? Everyone thinks he's going to go to the Vikings, which I can break this down some more detail. The Vikings interviewed two other guys. One of the other guys was a leader. I can't remember who it was. I think he was an offensive coordinator somewhere. He was the leader for the job, but the new GM worked with Harbaugh at at San Francisco with the 49ers. And he wanted to bring in Harbaugh late for an interview. So the other two guys I'm pretty sure interviewed yesterday. And I thought they were bringing Harbaugh in as like a formality. Because the rumor was that only the GM wanted to interview him. None of the other Vikings like ownership level team like members wanted to really bring him in. Because probably the stuff I highlighted, like really, he's probably not going to come in and be successful right away. But if he does get hired there, maybe they're a package then. Because usually the GM and the head coach have to work well together. So if they are good friends, maybe that's something that can pull him there instead of having him go directly to the Dolphins, I would think. But we'll find out. Hopefully by the time you listen to this, it's already settled. And I gave you my in-depth thoughts on why I think if he goes to the Vikings, what do you expect? 9-7 next year? Like,
that's fair.
I'm not expecting them to win 13 games. And that's what he did with the 49ers in his first year. Didn't he go like 13-3, like 3 years in a row or something like that? Maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't think he's in the position to do that right away. NFL championship games, I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier because I know it's been a crazy show, so we had a lot of stuff off the top. Joe Burrow, I said he could be the next Tom Brady. I want to see him win the Super Bowl. Personally, I think the Rams came together. They have a stacked team. They have guys like OBJ that is in an Antonio Brown situation where he needs to win the Super Bowl. He needs to prove himself. A couple of the other guys like Aaron Donald, like let's get these guys a Super Bowl ring. Matt Stafford, great guy, donates a bunch of money to the state of Michigan when he was with the Lions. Even with some of the hospitals, I know his wife had cancer, I believe. And so like he's really giving back to the community up there. So this is his last chance to kind of say, I'm going to win a Super Bowl. I've probably been wrong on most of my predictions, but I'm going to say that I think the Rams get it done for that reason. They kind of seem to be the team of destiny, and I know we'll have another week to get ready for the Super Bowl, but just off my early thing, the 49ers played it better than I thought, and now the odds-on favorite to get Garoppolo are the Steelers, Matt. Steelers and the Redskins or Commanders or whatever they are going to call themselves. Tomorrow we'll find out. Team. No, I think Joe Namath leaked it and said it was going to be the Commanders, right?
No, they will just be the football team for me.
No, because I hate the football team. That makes no sense to me. I'd rather just call them the Redskins until they actually give me a name. And then I'll probably call them the Redskins for like 5 more years after. Just like I call the Charlotte Hornets the Bobcats still. It's like, I'll call them the Bobcats and the Hornets or whatever. Because like you're changing the name all the time and the colors and stuff. It's really weird. So whatever, just stick with the team. But what were your thoughts on the championship games that you watched?
I was surprised that the Bengals were able to pull it out. I really thought that while the offense had the weapons, I didn't know that their defense was going to be able to keep Kansas City's playmakers in check as well as they did.
But Matt, they were just playing drop back zone and they were begging Mahomes to throw the ball and he didn't do it. Maybe that's how you beat him.
Well, it was like he was waiting.
They were rushing 3 with the spy, it looked like. And when he fumbled on the last play or whatever, that spy just decided to do like an old backyard 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi blitz on him. Yeah. Came in and he didn't know what to do. He just took the sack and got the fumble. And luckily their lineman was right there to fall back on it, because could you imagine if they would have lost in regulation on that? That would have haunted him, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Andy Reid, he's been known for his entire career as a choker. I think they just got hot with the young Mahomes and an offense that the league is starting to catch up on. And you can't just sit back there and throw deep. If they take that away from you, you got to be able to do something else. And I don't think they had it in their offense to kind of just take it to them. I don't understand when they were on the 5-yard line. Why don't you just keep running the ball?
Well, I think there were so many teams through the earlier part of the year that were trying to make him take the long shots, that he's kind of grown accustomed to trying to drive the ball down the field and just letting Kelsey and Hill just run past everyone. But by playing with the deeper coverages, he had to throw the ball short. And it was a good change of scheme. And he just wasn't willing to be patient enough to throw underneath, and just take what they were giving him.
Yeah, and he's always antsy back there trying to run or break the pocket and do the spin. And so I think if you do that, he doesn't have the top speed. He's not like a Kyler Murray that can get downfield.
Yeah.
Fast. So I think teams are starting to figure him out. And now is where, if he's going to be the next Tom Brady, he's got to adjust. And they really shouldn't have lost this year to the Bengals. If we're being honest, it should have been them back in the Super Bowl, if you're going to be that quarterback on that level. So, yeah. But we'll see. Maybe Burrow will just be the guy that takes over and just starts beating them. I don't know. But I am looking forward to the Super Bowl. It wasn't the matchup that I'd want to see. I wanted to see the Bengals play the 49ers like 1989 and then have a throwback. Because that 49ers team, their offense, they're kind of just hey, we don't know what to do. So we're just going to give the ball to Deebo Samuel and just see what he does. Right? He's going to just be wide receiver. He's going to be running back. He's going to be everything for us. And then Garoppolo's probably just going to spin around and flick the ball up for an interception. And it's what are you doing? Hold on to the ball and play for overtime. Play for overtime, right? Then you're a coin flip away from winning. It's not like Stafford's making great decisions. He almost fumbled that play against the Bucs and lost the game. They were that Stafford fumble that he fell on from losing.
Yeah.
So what are you doing, Garoppolo? So if he does go to Pittsburgh, people are trying to tell me that he's clutch. I'm like, clutch? What game are you watching? He's been up in almost all the games. He's had a big lead in the Super Bowl and they couldn't get anything done. How clutch is that?
But I think with that Rams team, this is one of those times where they realized how close they are to getting the job done. So they bring in Von Miller. They already had a pretty stout defensive line. They bring in Eric Weddle at safety, who then leads the team in tackles. Nothing just hang out in retirement, and then 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, I think I want to win a Super Bowl.
Well, that's what I said. You need to have a guy that can kind of do that. And I mean, I'm happy for Stafford. I hope he does win it. So, because that helps out the league, because then you have the knocks on these other guys that are I think it shows hey, you can play for the same team and try to build that franchise up, but if they don't give you support, go and win your Super Bowl and kind of prove that you are a great player, Because Phillip Rivers waited way too long, I think. I think if Phillip Rivers would have did the same thing and were able to make that move, maybe he would have won a Super Bowl. Now everyone won't know. They'll remember him just being out with the Chargers and kind of doing nothing. And then going to the Colts and actually having a much better year. And it's kind of he has to kick himself and say, why didn't I do this earlier? Sometimes you need that change of scenery. But the Rams are loaded, so.
But the question is, how pissed do you think the St. Louis fans are that they're now the Rams are playing for another Super Bowl. They'd be like, that could be us.
Twice, Matt. They lost the other one to Tom Brady. And remember, their offense didn't even show up in that game. So Tom Brady beat him was on like 10-7, wasn't it? It was like a really weird score. So like now they're like, we got Stafford. We're going to play the Bengals. And I mean, if you shut down, what do they have? Chase? Like that's it, right?
Well, I will truly be amazed if they win the Super Bowl, because I think, the meme has been out there for a long time about how bad the Bengals offensive line is.
Yeah.
And when they drafted Chase, that like, yeah, it's good to have this receiver, but there's going to be no blocking, so Burrow's going to get killed. And I think like the Chiefs have a pretty good defense, but I don't think that they're even on the same level as what the Rams are going to be.
Was it T. Higgins? He was out there catching those slants at the end of the game. I'm like, I don't even remember him playing anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was another big one. But like you said, their defense is good, or their offensive line is going to be hammered by the defense. It's just going to be a thing of, does Stafford make mistakes, and does Burrow make mistakes?
Have time? Does he have time? Because if they're just bearing down on him, like, and he doesn't have time to think, like that could be a game changer.
Well, that Bengals team is young too, and they've had no success. So now you have 2 weeks off to get ready for the Super Bowl. How are they going to handle it? I mean, Von Miller's been there. Some of the Rams have been there. And they're all old at this point, that they're not going to be like out partying, They're going to be like, damn, I'm lucky to get out of bed. I'm like 40 years old.
44 years old.
Like Tom Brady. Remember that he got drunk because he's like, I only had one beer. First beer I had in like 5 years. I passed out immediately. So I think it'll be a good one. We'll get into it next week. Try to get into a little bit more breakdown, but that's my thoughts on the championship games. Niners are close, but I still think they're a quarterback away. Same with the Chiefs, close. I really thought that the Mahomes needed to step up there. It wasn't like, same with like Aaron Rodgers. Like I told you, when they had the lead, I knew that they were going to lose because Aaron Rodgers wasn't going to step up again. Same thing with Patrick Mahomes. Romo was talking about how he was going to score, and I'm like, what's he seeing that I'm not seeing? Like, Mahomes looked jittery. He wasn't confident, and just goes down and almost fumbles the game away. And then in overtime, throws that pick. Didn't he throw the pick in overtime? And it was game over. It's like, what are you doing? So that's what I expected. Anything else you have on the NFL?
No.
Don't have much else for the rest of the show for college. I know we have signing day stuff coming up. We already kind of hit on Michigan talk with the Harbaugh move and how that's going to play out for the college football, just because college football coaches are kind of set for right now. Williams ended up transferring to USC. He toyed around with Wisconsin, which was kind of surprising. But, I mean, everyone kind of knew he was going to follow Lincoln Riley, right? So, like, it makes sense. Like, Lincoln Riley has been recruiting all these guys. I almost wonder if that was kind of like a work that they already had, like, kind of figured out. But that's another big thing to keep an eye on, too, because, like I had said, Luke Fickell was interested in Notre Dame, has experience. They hired internally someone that didn't have experience to try to keep their stuff together when Brian Kelly left. Now he's going to be coaching in their only rivalry game remaining, since they don't play Michigan anymore, against Lincoln Riley at USC, that's bringing in and trying to get all these loaded players that transfer in from LA and 5 stars from everywhere that he had at Oklahoma transferring there, that they're going to have a pretty loaded team, Matt.
Yeah.
And so is he going to be able to get past the Oklahoma hump, get into the playoffs, and actually have the team show up? Because he was almost in Harbaugh mode there.
Yeah, but I think even though USC is typically a blue blood, I think it's going to take him some time, because that's a 4-win USC team that was getting blown out last year. So, like, I think
transfer portal, Matt.
But they won't be the number 1 team in the portal.
That's because they're only Florida State, because they take more guys probably. They only need USC only needed 1 or 2. Which There's a new recruiting database. I didn't send you this off the show. I kept forgetting to. On 3, did you see that, or 1 with the 3 at the for the E? I don't know what the hell you want to call it. So apparently the guy that has been creating all the older recruiting sites, like he created like 24/7 in them. It seems like his scam is not really a scam, but he builds up a recruiting site, a new one, then sells it to like CBS or whatever, and then a couple years later he creates another new one. So this is his new one, where he's doing the same exact thing, where he's taking all the other recruiting databases and creating a new average with his team of scouts. But the one thing that his does that the other one doesn't have, they have a NIL tracker, so you can kind of see the incoming class, how much money they're making already, which I think will be interesting. So that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on and bringing in for recruiting. Kind of off topic, because the last thing I had on here anyway, were the Big Ten's looking at getting rid of divisions, Matt, which I think is dumb, because I know that they're going to screw this up.
Fair enough.
And I already saw people's projections. I've saw the dumbest ideas of like, hey, let's give Michigan a crossover game with Purdue. It's like, why? Why the hell would we want to play Purdue? Like, that's nothing for us. Like, you can't give us Minnesota or like some other team that we actually have a trophy and a rivalry with. Because of course we're going to get Ohio State, which number one screws both of us. Because if one of us is good, then that's it. I've seen projections where they're going to have Michigan play Michigan State and Ohio State every year. Meanwhile, Penn State might end up getting Rutgers and Maryland, Matt. Because for God's sakes, you got to have Ohio State play Michigan and Illinois for that Illabuck trophy, right? So it's like, in what world do they just think like, hey, the best idea is to give Penn State, Rutgers, and Maryland, and then whatever other games? Like, how unbalanced is that? Where you're going to say, okay, we're going to screw Ohio State, Michigan, but we're going to give Penn State the absolute easiest games of all time in the conference, Matt. Like, can you imagine?
But it's not like Penn State's going to take advantage of that and turn that into a powerhouse. Like,
you say that now.
I'm saying it now. You can quote me later, because I don't know that they're going to push the NILs as aggressively, and they're going to get lost.
You didn't look at the new numbers. I didn't share it with you because I forgot to do it. But I think Penn State was pretty good. I honestly think most schools are around $30,000, like 20 to 30 grand. I think Michigan's there. I think Florida State was there. I think Penn State was there. The only one that was really ahead was A&M.
But look at where Penn State's at, though. Like, from an administration standpoint, they're not pushing to upgrade things to be competitive on the national level. They're competitive being within that top 2, top 3 within the conference.
Oh yeah, did we share that?
Stadium sold out, and then like they're just on par. Because I talk with a couple different Penn State people, and they're just like, yeah, they're happy that we're just ranked. That we're making a bowl game. Like, that's good enough.
Oh, I told you that was their thing. Whenever they didn't make the playoffs and they didn't push for it, that was the one thing where it's like, there we go.
As long as students are going to class and graduating, and there's no off the field issues, they're satisfied.
So did we talk about the recruiting? So all American high school recruits, they voted on best college facilities. And of course, Oregon was number 1, Georgia, Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan, LSU, Oklahoma, and then Penn State. So they were tied. Penn State was tied with Oklahoma and Texas and A&M for 8th. They were the ones that got the other votes. So I would say that, like, you have the top ones. What are we getting at? So I guess they're all about that. Those are all like the multiple vote getters. And then you had other like one-off ones where people were voting probably for the school they went to. Like, someone voted for Air Force, Arkansas. Even Illinois got a vote in Indiana, which I know from the Big Ten. Purdue's on here. Purdue has shit facilities that are so bad that they couldn't even get air conditioning in the Michigan locker room that one year, remember? They were like, we can't do it. You guys have to meet kind of in the hallway. So, oh yeah, great facilities, Matt. The best. But I didn't notice that Florida State's not on this list, Matt. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, once you get that stupid look off your face, but
That's me trying to read.
no. I mean that was partly why Jimbo Fisher left, because they were having the difficulties of coming to terms with how and where and why they were going to put some of those facilities in place. Now there has been an increase with changes in administration and new athletic director that they're going to push more of those projects. But it's like, just like with everything since that coaching debacle happened, they're behind the curve, and now we're playing catch up to try to gain ground on some of these programs that were prepared for it.
Well, like you said, I was surprised Penn State was on the list because it seems like they haven't been focusing on it. Like, I know Michigan's been focusing on it and putting a ton of upgrades in. I know Clemson and A&M have been doing the same thing. So, like, you hear of which schools are really focused on building their facilities, and of course, they're the ones that are in the top. I was just surprised that Penn State was still so high, because I feel like Franklin keeps complaining about that and asking for more money for that stuff. I just don't really see any announcements of them, like, showing it off or building it, right?
Well, right, and I think, like, where Franklin's getting frustrated is that he knows that they're good enough to be good, but in State College, that's a one-horse town. Like, he can really hammer it. It's all football. It's all business here, and really could, if they wanted to invest the money at a high level, they could really push for some of it.
Well, so that's the one thing where I honestly, I know I was joking about, like, I guess kind of joking about the schedule, but the big thing that's really going to help is that the Big Ten is supposed to be going down to an 8-game schedule. And I've been preaching this for years now. Get to an 8-game schedule until the ACC and the SEC change it, because you're at a distinct disadvantage having Michigan go to Iowa and get eliminated from the playoffs in late November while Alabama's playing Jackson State or someone. So, like, why are you doing that to yourself when you can play it and then still do the crossover games? Because they're saying, well, now we have an extra game for a rivalry game. Oh, okay, great. We're going to play Notre Dame again? No, they're not going to play us. But even if you filled, like, I would trade the Iowa game for Notre Dame any day. Because you're going to play Notre Dame early. Doesn't really matter in type of the Big Ten. You're going to play Ohio State. They're most likely going to put you with Michigan State. I would argue that you should only have, maybe 1 or 2 rivalry games. And if you did do 2, I don't think you should do 3, because, like, why is Michigan playing Purdue every year? That's dumb. Not every team has 3 rivals. And then you're locking down a lesser of a chance to play a rotating rival like Minnesota. Now you're going to play them every 5 years because you have to play Purdue every year for some stupid reason. Let's go ahead, and I would say, to make it the most fair, I think you would just take a look at the East Conference and you would make them Penn State play Ohio State and Michigan State every year. Michigan State plays Penn State and Michigan every year. Michigan plays Michigan State and Ohio State, and then Ohio State plays Michigan and Penn State. Ohio State would kind of get screwed there because they're playing the better of the 2 teams, but I think that's the most fair way you can do it, because you can't just give Penn State Rutgers and Maryland, because, like you said, they're not going to take advantage of it because they're not going to sell tickets. Like, can you imagine if their schedule ended up being Rutgers, Maryland, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, and, like, Minnesota one year? Complete shit. Like, who's going to buy that ticket, Matt?
No, see, they will. And that's why they would schedule that, because they know there's nothing else to do in State College. So everyone would come out and just get hyped for a 72-7 blowout. And
then they would play Pitt as their ACC crossover game. Hopefully Michigan gets some crossover games with some of their rivals like Duke, like our ACC basketball rival Duke and UNC, get them on the football schedule because that would be nice for us. Let's go ahead and do that. And then go ahead and go 12-0 Penn State, and then play an Ohio State team that is actually battle tested and just get destroyed, right? In the championship game, almost like Wisconsin of yore. Remember, like a couple years ago, like when they were in that other division where they were kind of coasting through. But I honestly think that's the best way to do it. And then you put another group out west where you have maybe Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota kind of do the same thing. And then the rest of the schools, you're kind of like, guys, we honestly don't care about you. Like, I'm not being rude, but we don't care about your rivalries. No one watches them on TV. So that's what this is about. People will watch Iowa play Nebraska, and you'll get big viewers on it. People are going to watch Michigan play Penn State or Michigan State or something. They're not watching Iowa or Indiana play Purdue. So you guys can just be rivals, and if you have like a weird number of rivals, because we're going to make it unbalanced, we don't care. That's honestly what the Big Ten should do. And then you have a floating schedule where then you can beat up on those guys on a rotation. And you're like, all right, cool. And then you can even sell it to them like, well, now you don't have to worry about playing those big guys every year. They're playing each other. Like, just come on. And now you have a chance to make that championship game, right? You're not going to be able to make it if you're in the division with them like now. So that would be my thing. I think the 3-game protected rivalry is only because of the numbers and how it works out. It would be like a perfect whatever mix, but I say less. ACC kind of did it where they didn't have any protected rivals, right? Was it like a random draw? I can't remember how they did it that year. Because Notre Dame kind of came in, which gave them one extra team. So it was like a weirder number. They couldn't do it. But maybe they had one. I don't remember how they did it. But if the Big Ten did that, let's just go for it. I just don't want the big schools getting screwed and then having like an Illinois that played no one randomly go 12-0 only to get absolutely destroyed in the Big Ten championship, or worse, make the playoffs and then get killed, even worse than what the Big Ten's been doing. Like a 78-0 beatdown. And then everyone's like, oh my gosh, that was brutal. Who would have thought the winner of Illinois and Rutgers for the Big Ten championship wasn't going to be good? It's like, okay, perfect. They only played each other during the regular season, had one loss. Could you imagine? Or whoever lost, like whatever, Penn State loses to Rutgers or whatever. That would be the one loss to get them in. And you're like, Franklin, what the hell? That's your rival. We know you're unrivaled, but get in there. That's all I had. I don't have anything else. We'll keep an eye on it. Like I said, recruiting, we're going to be bringing in another new source, just kind of track NILs. And my main thing, get the games to be the same. 8-game schedule, play 2 cupcakes instead of just one. Let your team rest. And then if the other conferences can play and say, look, you've been doing it for how many years? We don't care about the rivalry crossover games. Like, we don't. And then we'll get some benefits. Pitt will play Penn State again. Pitt will play Penn State, and that will be their Big Ten ACC crossover. Apparently, there is rumors that it's alliance-driven, where I don't think those schools are going to give up the rivalry games with the SEC, but if they really wanted to cut them off, that's where I think you could make that move. I just think there's too much political stuff where, like, South Carolina and Clemson, like, Clemson's not going to say, you know what, we're done playing you. We're going to play Oregon every year instead, which I think would be a more exciting game and probably better for both brands, but I just don't see it. But if other conferences want to cut off the SEC, that would be a funny way to do it. Just say, hey, we just don't care anymore. Florida's not going to play Florida State, or Florida State's not going to play Florida. We're going to instead play Penn State, and that's going to be our new thing, and we're going to keep playing Miami, and that's all we need. And then Florida's going to be like, well, who are we going to play? UCF? What if we lose to them? And it's like, all right, well, that's your fault. So that's what I want to see. I want to see some pettiness back in college football, where like Texas and A&M, Texas and then A&M, they didn't play each other, and now they're going to be back in the same conference. So do the same thing. Just don't play your rival because they're in the SEC, and say like, look, you guys figure it out with your week schedule. Because I imagine if they cut that out, what would the SEC then do? Go to a 9-game schedule? Because that's their excuse why they can't. And then meanwhile, the ACC and the Big Ten have that 8-game schedule, and then they have the padded records to make them look like a better conference. That's a strategy, Matt. You have anything for the final bell?
Yeah, the schedules were released, and Florida State has opened up with Duquesne. So if they lose to the Dukes, I will cry aggressively. Yes.
Did they have to go to Duquesne for that game?
No, they're going to Tally. But then we follow it up with the following week. playing LSU. So
Oh my god,
we don't know. Are we gonna get dancing Brian Kelly? Do we get Southern Brian Kelly? Do we get Massachusetts Brian Kelly? So you pick which one you want.
I sent you that picture. Which technique did you like better, Brian Kelly or Urban Meyer?
They're both creepy.
I just don't understand why they bought that for their facility, and then someone voted for that being the best facility, Matt. Like that weird little stage. Like, what is that for? Lap dances? Like, that has to be what that's for, right?
Yes, that's to prove that he's not at Notre Dame anymore.
Because they wouldn't have that there. But anything else you got?
Nope, that's it.
So we'll be getting back into it next week. Tell your friends about the show. We're still doing it. Southboundsports.com. You can go there for all the latest stuff. Just subscribe. You can get the feed anywhere you get podcasts from. You can even play it on like your digital devices. So, or like your voice activated ones. I don't want to say the names in case my house will start talking to me. But check it out there. Tell your friends, and we'll see you next week.